Welcome, everybody. It's great to see you all and from all over the world. And also, I see some familiar faces, so that's always lovely too. And appreciate everybody showing up for this session today. And as Marnie said, I will be talking, my Dharma talk today will be Karma, Choice, in the Mind. And we'll start out with a period of silent meditation, about 25 minutes or so. And I'll do a little bit of guiding, and then we'll move into silence. And then we'll transition from there into the Dharma talk. So if you want to go ahead and get settled in for our meditation period, you just closing your eyes if you'd like, if that's how you practice, or however you settle in. And just taking a moment to really feel a sense of arriving in this present moment, feeling your body on the cushion or the chair, wherever you are, just feeling the sensations of being present in this physical form, and taking a couple of deep conscious breaths. Really feeling the breath in the body. There's something so grounding about the breath, connecting us to this very moment, connecting us to presence. And we'll do a brief body scan just to scan for any tension, and then just gently releasing that tension if you find it. And so we'll start at the top of the head and move downward. And so just bringing attention to the forehead, the eyes, the ears, mouth, jaw, and just releasing any tightness. And now moving attention down to the neck, shoulders, and just letting go. And now scanning the attention down through the arms, the elbows, all the way to the hands. And if there's any tightness, just gently releasing. And taking a moment to bring some attention to the sensations of your hands and whatever they're touching, whether they're touching each other in your lap, on your legs, or someplace else. Just feeling that sense of connection. And sometimes we can find some pleasant sensations in the hands. So just noticing whatever you are experiencing in this part of your body. And now bringing attention to the chest, solar plexus, down into the belly. And just noticing and letting go of any tension if you're able. And again, really feeling the movement of the breath in the body. And bringing attention down the back to where you're sitting. And just noticing a sense of being supported and that sensation of connection. And bringing attention to the thighs, the knees, the shins, and all the way down to the feet. And just letting go. And feeling that connection with the feet and the ground. Just feeling yourself being supported and held up, being held by the earth. And now notice all of the bodily sensations that you're feeling in this moment. So we're just bringing a kind attention to whatever's present. And now also noticing the places around the body where there's space. And so we're also aware of those areas where there is no particular contact with something tangible. And so we can be aware of both the contact of tangible things and the space around. And notice how it's all supporting us in this present moment. And now also aware of any emotions that may be present. And noticing where you may feel the emotion in the body as a physical sensation. And just bringing a kind awareness to whatever's present. You may also notice whatever sounds are arising, both near and far, and also allowing the sounds to be part of the experience in the present moment. And always returning at any time to the breath as an anchor, as a form of grounding, a form of connection. And also noticing how awareness itself is able to hold all of our experiences with nothing left out. So we don't really have to do anything for this awareness to be here. It's already here. We just have to show up. Even if we have just moments of really feeling connected, it's always here, something we can always return to. And this great space of awareness can be our home. It can allow us to hold all of our experiences, both the joys and the sorrows, the wanted, the unwanted. All of it can be held in this space of kind awareness. As we sit together, we practice, we breathe, just finding a home in this moment. So I wanted to briefly speak about my relationship to Dana and the practice of Dana before I go into the Dharma talk. And as a teacher, the practice of Dana, generosity, which is the translation, the English translation that we use, is a form of intimacy or connection. That is, that there is a quality of openness, a non-transactional quality of giving and receiving that we participate in together. And so I give, and I don't think about what I'm getting back. And those that want to reciprocate and give are meeting in a connected, intimate way. I consider it a form of intimacy that's different than putting a number on something or saying this is what it's going to cost. It really opens us to a quality of connection, of giving and receiving, that I find really powerful and unique in this tradition, in the Buddhist tradition. And so I just wanted to speak to that for a minute because I really think it's a beautiful practice, and it allows people to also give within their means, and it opens it to accessibility to everybody, which I think is such a lovely thing. You know, the barriers aren't there, and then people can offer according to what their heart, speaks to them to give, and what their means, whatever those means are. And so I think it's just such a beautiful practice. And so I just wanted to speak to that briefly, what it personally means to me, so that each person can, listen to their own hearts, and that we can practice. We're really practicing together and co-creating this wonderful community of Dharma together. And to me, that's such a beautiful, connected way to practice and to be together. So I just wanted to share that with you. And now I'm going to move into my Dharma talk for this afternoon, or wherever you are, evening or morning, wherever you might be in your time zone. And so this is karma, choice, and the mind, or mental factors. And I'm going to try to kind of pull these together in a way that hopefully really speaks to how we can work with these in our practice, and how we can awaken more fully to how we can utilize this practice to reduce our own suffering and the suffering of others. And so I wanted to start with a quote from Ajahn Chah. The mind and mental factors do exist as part of reality. They truly exist in conventional reality. But the Buddha taught that once you know them, let them go. Because the mind and mental factors are the very things which lead you to both that which is wrong and that which is right in life. If you are wise, they can lead you to what is right. If you are foolish, they lead you to what is wrong. The mind and mental factors are the world. The Buddha used the things of the world to observe the world. Having observed the way things are, he came to know the world and described himself as being one who clearly knows the world. And so karma is action in Buddhism driven by intention. And it's easy to, maybe on the surface think that if our intentions are good, so our actions will follow. But of course, as many of us know, our intentions are often under the influence of strong conditioning. And we could look at conditioning from many, many angles. And we could also look at, in Buddhism, the three poisons of greed, ignorance, and delusions. And sometimes we may not have as much choice as we think, but we can begin to look at this, and we can begin to open this up in a way that can really help us to find a more skillful response. But I wanted to talk about a continuum from no choice at all to excessive emphasis on choice. And I'll start with something that really caught my attention last year. And some of you may have read this. It got a lot of attention at the time. But there was a very respected researcher at Stanford University who had been studying the brain for decades. And so he was a neurology and biology professor. And he concluded that our self-conception as individuals and as species is based on myth. He said, we have no free will at all. Now that sounds pretty rough. I mean, that doesn't sound too encouraging. And I don't fully agree with him, but I do believe one of the things he was pointing to, which I think is important and useful, especially in the realm of justice, is he said holding people morally responsible for their actions is wrong. And what he's really speaking about is looking at, and this was really the point, if you're born into privilege, a relatively stable home environment, you're more likely to thrive and maintain your privilege, and statistics support this. And if you're born into very difficult circumstances, whether an unstable or abusive home, economic marginalization, it's hard to escape. It's hard to come out of that. And this is all supported by research and statistics, that there is some element that is often outside of choice or hard to come out of. And of course, there's always exceptions to this. It's not that it's a hopeless situation, but that there's certainly truth to this. And then on the other side, and we all know, some people will say that we always, always, always have a choice. In every circumstance, we can always make a choice to respond within a certain way. And that really overlooks the point that some aspects of conditioning are simply not within our realm of being able to choose a different path right away. And of course, so much of the Dharma path is about working with this in a way that we can begin to open that choice. But I think the attitude that there's always a choice can become a form of blame that's lacking compassion, like, well, you had a choice. And whether we're thinking of it in terms of ourselves or other people, holding that in a realm of understanding can give us more opportunity to respond compassionately. And so in Buddhism, as we cultivate this ability to choose our response, we begin to see where are the places in our lives that are very tight and closed, and where are the places that are open. And I often like to quote Viktor Frankl, whose famous quote is, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space lies our power to choose our response." And in Buddhism, we could call that space awareness. We bring and we cultivate awareness around those situations that feel tight and feel difficult, feel painful, the ones that we can't always respond to immediately in the way we wish to. And some situations are easier than others to begin to cultivate that space. And I will say this, and I'm speaking as someone who's been meditating for 30 plus years now, that even through all these years and my capacity and cultivation to exercise right intention and to cultivate that space, occasionally there's an area or two where that choice feels very difficult to reach. And to have a perfectly clear mind at all times and a perfectly good response is usually not possible. And that's okay. It's just part of being human. And part of that is meeting it with compassion. And just an example for me this morning is that I was running into a series of tech problems before this session. And the first one had to do with Zoom and the fact that when I was registering to come on here to give this session today, the Zoom was not sending me the link. I was getting no emails from Zoom. And so I tried multiple times. The link was not coming to my inbox. And I checked junk and I tried a different email address, nothing worked. So I had my husband register for me. And then the link came through to his email. And so he forwarded it to me, but it didn't come. And so finally he just cut and pasted the link itself and sent it to me, and it came. So we finally got that solved. And then through research, I discovered that once your email bounces with Zoom, you quit getting emails from them. So you have to write to them and ask them to open it up again. So I finally figured that out. And so then I ran into a thing with my notes for the talk today that I had to fix. And then I thought, things always come in threes. Now I wonder if there's going to be a third before we start. And sure enough, what happened was my Bluetooth headset went on the blink, and right before we started. And so I had to turn off my Bluetooth. So sure enough, in threes. And usually I don't have these kinds of issues, but I think we all know that when you have a tech issue, when you need your tech to be working, there can be a bit of a response, right? There can be a little bit, of activation. And I noticed that I was feeling activated. I noticed that there was a feeling of tightness, a feeling of perhaps not quite that spaciousness of being as responsive as I would like to be in that moment. And this is just a very simple example, of course, but then what I did was, as we started sitting, I just brought my attention back to the moment and brought it into spacious awareness and compassion. And then slowly everything just kind of came back to normal, started to relax. And so it's not always about trying to change our response. Sometimes it's simply being compassionate to our response and to those knots that may be present, and then letting awareness do its work. And so this spacious awareness that's all around us and through us is not the self so much as it is just this mind of awareness. And it is so powerful. And when we combine that with compassion, the doors can really open up, and we don't have to bust the doors down. And to me, that is one of the great powers of this practice, is that great loving awareness that can hold us through the difficulties when we're able to turn our mind to it. And of course, that's what we're cultivating when we cultivate choice. Can we turn our mind to the spaciousness and the awareness and compassion that's already here? And so I want to also talk about another aspect of consciousness that has to do with choice. And I'm going to start with this quote from Thich Nhat Hanh. And he's explaining choice through store consciousness. Our consciousness includes both individual and collective, subjective and objective. Yet we continue to believe that consciousness is one thing and that there is an outer objective reality apart from consciousness. We want to be directly in touch with the reality of the world, yet the objective reality we think exists independently of our sense perceptions is itself a creation of collective consciousness. What is considered fashionable, for example, is the creation of the collective consciousness of a society. You believe that you have your own notion of beauty, but if you look deeply, you will see that it has been formed from notions of many other people. When you shop for a shirt, for example, you think it is you who chooses the shirt, but the moment you see a shirt that aligns with the seeds in your store consciousness, the shirt chooses you. You think you have exercised your freedom of choice, but the choice was already made a long time ago. So this is an interesting thing to reflect on. Where do we have choice? And where is the conditioning actually driving our choice? And what does this mean for our practice? In Buddhism, we do our best to cultivate beneficial states for ourselves and others. And there's a choice to some degree. We begin to look at wholesome factors of sila, for instance, ethics, and generosity, kindness, compassion. And yet it's interesting that if we look at it, often good, wholesome, positive habits at times may be harder to form and maintain than difficult ones, or the ones that aren't so wholesome. There's the dopamine hit, the immediacy, instant gratification, grabbing for our devices or whatever it might be. And often good habits, wholesome habits, are delayed gratification that take more effort to cultivate. Meditation, exercise, loving kindness, compassion. And sometimes those things might even feel a little inconvenience. But part of the practice is to do what doesn't always feel easy initially, little by little. And slowly those new habits can be formed, and they begin to make our lives perhaps a little easier in certain ways. Suddenly there's a little bit more joy, there's a little bit more space. And when we work with some of the difficult patterns, often they're psychological. They can be elements of anger, the need for control, self-referencing, negative thinking, craving. We can see those places perhaps we're not yet free. And yet we continue to work those practices little by little, and slowly the door begins to open. And the idea in practice is ultimately to extinguish karma. But then how do we work with intention to change our karma? How do we work with that? And so here's a question. This is from the Buddha, a questioner and Buddha's response. Is a person, a self, responsible for one's own happiness or unhappiness? The Buddha said, I would not say it that way. The next question is, are others responsible for one's own happiness or unhappiness? The Buddha said, no, I would not say it that way. So the next question is, so is it that both self and others are responsible for one's happiness or unhappiness? No, he said, I would not say it that way. Is it neither self nor others are responsible for their own happiness or unhappiness? No, the Buddha said, I would not say it that way. And so the questioner asked, how would you say it? And the Buddha said that in order to understand the causes and conditions for happiness and unhappiness, you have to understand there is a cause and effect relationship that does not have a single point of beginning, a single point of responsibility. And so this speaks to the wheel of dependent origination. We're not looking for a single point. We're looking at all of the interconnected causes and effects that go into this life. And this is where we can go back to the Stanford researcher who was saying, he sees all of these elements that play into the way people respond in their lives, and that these are not simply dependent on the individual, that there is an interconnected quality, and that this is something that we can understand as being internal and external, and how we are influenced by it. And we could also say that often our family history is perhaps one of the most profound in terms of our conditioning. That is one of the ones that have maybe the deepest, one of the deepest impacts of our lives. And so, for me, for a long time, I looked at my own karma as being personally responsible, and that everything that happened to me was for a reason that was to my fault or my credit. The family that I was born into, the effort I made to overcome trauma, to find success in my life. And, I was born into a very difficult family situation where I experienced a great deal of trauma and loss very early. And it left me in a state of really complete non-functionality. It was very extreme. And I lost both of my parents before I was 16. And there was a lot of alcoholism and abuse, just to go on and on. I mean, I don't want to go on and on, but it was just a great deal of difficulty. And so I was left very confused about my life. When you're that young and you go through that much, you start asking, what's going on here? I was studying Eastern philosophy and I came into Buddhism, and I saw the teachings on karma, and I started taking them very literally. In other words, I looked at karma and reincarnation as somehow the causation for my being in my suffering, that I did something in a past life that was somehow, not skillful, and then I deserved to be born into this incarnation where I suffered a great deal. But what I found was that by doing it that way and thinking that way and holding myself responsible, it didn't help me. It didn't do anything to alleviate my suffering. And so I had to move away from that. I had to move away from trying to figure it out. What happened to me? Why is this happening? I had to let go of that. And as I let go of it, and as I let go of trying to find a cause or an answer, what happened was that through allowing myself to not know, so this is moving into not trying to figure it out or come to an answer or to fix it, the compassion and listening to my grief in that spaciousness of not knowing is what began to alleviate my suffering. Now, I did go to therapy, I worked through a lot of my issues, but there was nothing more powerful then allowing my suffering to be held in the compassionate space of awareness that allowed the grief and the pain to begin to alleviate. And so that was the change. And so trying to figure out karma in this case didn't relieve or alleviate the suffering. But the karma, instead of presence, of cultivating awareness and presence, was what began to undo the knotting. And that is what began to open up to me the healing and the spaciousness. And this is what the Dharma practice did for me, and why I have been on the path for so many years, because that first taste of freedom and that first moment of the alleviating of suffering was so powerful that there was no way I was going to turn away after that, because I thought Buddha knew what he was talking about. He talked about looking into your suffering with awareness and presence. And so looking into it and getting to know it, and then slowly, the opening occurred. And this has been the most powerful opening for me. And then speaking of the interconnected quality of, kind of coming to what Thich Nhat Hanh said, internal and external, not being separate. One of the attitudes that I developed since I lost my parents was that I was going to lift myself up by my bootstraps. I'm on my own, and because my parents weren't there, I'm just going to have to figure it out for myself. And so I had this idea that I'm doing it all on my own. And yet, as I look back now, I understand that that was an illusion, that there were so many little pieces that played a role in opening the doors for me. In high school, I took a class on Buddhism. They were offering a class on Zen Buddhism when I was 16. And that was my first encounter with Buddhism. And it just was so powerful. It opened the door for me. And I just began studying and reading and learning. And then the people along the way after that gave me chances, in whatever I was doing. The teachers that I met, the Sangha that I began to cultivate, and get to know people. And it took a long time to realize that it wasn't an inside job, so that there may have been intention, and that intention carried me forward. But there were so many factors that played a role, this interconnected factor, that what I was talking about related to Donna, all of that played a role, so that it wasn't just an inside job. There was so much more to it than that. And then we can look at then we can let go of looking at karma in an isolated way, and understanding, how much all of these factors play together. Because when we try to isolate karma, it can turn too heavily into blame. And then there's the loss of compassion, the loss of space. And so I want to read this quote also. So to say that the self, and only the self, is responsible was to put it on a singular point of responsibility and denies the field of cause and effect that comes into play. The same applies if you blame someone else. The Buddha did not want to say it this way or that way, but rather he pointed to the causes and conditions that bring about happiness and unhappiness. So we could say Buddha was really simplifying it. The teachings of karma are part of this quest, this effort to look at the causal relationships that bring about happiness and freedom from suffering, and to look at those situations that cause suffering. So the Buddha essentially said, don't blame others and don't blame yourself. So how do we work with this then? Don't blame others, don't blame yourself. So we can continue to exercise choice little by little, and there is a way. But we have to remember that there will be both obstacles and support along the way, circumstances that are out of our control. I mean, sometimes there are horrible weather events. COVID came along. Some people died. I mean, there's so many things that are mysterious in this life that we can't say has a single point of origination. We can't always figure it out. But what we can do, and I think this is the beauty of the path, is that we can cultivate these qualities that the Buddha taught us to cultivate. We can cultivate these practices. We can begin little by little to see that space between stimulus and response where we do have a choice to respond. And hopefully, those responses then become more aligned with our values. They become aligned with our intention, our kindness, and our compassion, and gives us a chance to do more good in this world. And so, just a kind of last reflection as I wrap up the talk, what support might be, what support are you grateful for? What do you recognize as important? And what feels like an impediment, internal or external? And then can we come back to right intention, refresh what matters most, and let that be our guide? You know, we can consider our right intention, kind intention as a beacon in the dark. It may not always manifest in the way we want it to. We may not always see the results, but we keep going. I think it was Mahatma Gandhi who said, "You can't worry about the results. Just stick with what your heart is telling you to do and keep going." And that's what we do. We keep going. So I think I'm going to close the Dharma talk there. And I am happy to open it up for comments or questions. If you would like to raise your hand, and then I do see there's some questions also in the chat, but we do have, let's start with, I think, Brian. Do I see? I'm not seeing Brian. Do you have are you muted?
I see Emma Bain has their name, their hand up. Maybe I could bring on Emma.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you, Lisa, for that. That was beautiful. And I have a bit of a question about how to manage my inner critic. So I've done the last 10 years interested in the Dharma and done a lot of meditation and rewiring my brain in terms of, you were talking about like response and stimulus and taking a pause and being responsible for my emotions, communicating my needs, etc. But for example, today I've been particularly grumpy, and I was aware when I was with friends that I was feeling that way. So I communicated that, and I really tried whenever that emotion came up to allow it to be there, but obviously for it not to influence my behavior with others. But then later on, I just spent like the next 2 hours thinking, oh, I was so grumpy and my friends probably hated me and blah, blah, blah. And I messaged my friends and said, you know, just in case you can relate, this is what's been going on for me. And it's crazy because I know you guys don't care and you love me regardless. But yeah, I didn't know if you had any advice, because that always seems to come up once I've like done the rewiring. It's like, oh, well, it wasn't good enough because you still felt this way and your friends probably hated it or whatever it is.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's a good question. And yeah, there are those areas that feel intractable sometimes, right? Where it just feels like this is one area where no matter what I do with my practice, this particular response continues along, and then you kind of get frustrated with yourself. So was there anything, let me ask you this, when you wrote to your friends and you said, you know, I don't know if you said I'm sorry or I didn't mean to be that way or whatever you wrote to them, what happened when you did that? Did that relieve any of your self pressure, or did it just feel like a kind of another habitual response?
I did it with the intention of not apologizing because I'm trying to as well be more authentic in situations, so I'm not happy all the time just because that's what we're conditioned to be like. And they were like, oh yeah, I know what you mean. So I got that, which is what I get from Sangha as well, of like, I'm not alone in feeling this way and in, you know, responding in this way. And I also don't want to push away my inner critic too much, because I know that's a part of me and I want to welcome it and for it to have space within me, but incredibly difficult. So yeah, I just wondered if you had any advice around that.
Yeah, yeah, and I would say, especially with those habituated places, and like I was mentioning, even people that have been practicing for 30 years, most of us still have those tight spots, that where there just still doesn't feel like there's spaciousness in the moment. And a lot of times it's like after the fact when you start to notice that inner critic starting up, see if you can just if you it's still going to be that pause, that moment of seeing the activity of the mind starting up and that inner critic is going, and just having, if you have that moment of awareness and see if you can just stop and before you try to control it or get rid of it or say, oh, I shouldn't be, the second arrow then is, oh, I shouldn't be doing that, or I shouldn't be criticizing, but like, can you just bring a moment of presence and kindness to the critic itself, so that you're not saying, oh, why is this still happening? Or, I shouldn't be doing this, but like that kindness to the critic is like a starting point. So then you're bringing your attention back into the knotted areas and bringing that compassion into the very part of you that's feeling, critical. And I find that sometimes that's the only doorway that starts to open the space again, is just stopping in the middle of that. And it can be really painful to be really fully aware of the mental activity and that self-criticism, but it just takes that moment, and offering kindness to that hard, tight place. And I find that's the one thing that'll start to loosen it up. But it's like, and then so the intention here is to start being kind when you notice the inner critic starting up. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, I've done a lot of work with, I know there was someone before Tara Brach that coined the RAIN method, and it seems like I need to now apply that to my inner critic maybe as well.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So we have Charles.
Yes, if it takes too much time, don't do it, please. But something interfered and I couldn't hear what you said, what turned you from your very difficult traumatic past and got you turned around the corner to being able to resolve and improve yourself. Could you repeat that briefly, please?
Sure. Yeah, it was. I kept trying to figure out the causes for my suffering. And so I kept looking at karma and cause and effect and why did I do this or who did that, and I just kept getting caught in trying to figure it out and trying to solve it. And I realized that what had been missing was simply by moving into the mind that didn't know, didn't have an answer, I could just start being with the grief and the loss itself, as opposed to trying to fix it. And that's where the space, and I was using in my meditation, I was able to connect with the field of spacious awareness, and I could allow that to hold all of my grief. And so when I quit trying to fix, solve, or resolve, and simply meeting my experience as it is and as it was arising, then the grief began to move through me. There was a lot of space, and I just needed that space, instead of trying to fix it or blunt, all those things that were causing, just adding to my suffering, adding to the second arrow. So it was like a letting go.
Okay, just real quickly. Well, and I'm a novitiate when it comes to Buddhism. I've been doing about a year of different sanghas. But so my question is, what I hear from you is that you stop clinging to the past traumas and all that and trying to figure it out, and you release it and give you spaciousness. But I also am under the understanding that we are to analyze the cause of our suffering so that we can release it and all that. So I'm sort of getting a little mixed message. Can you just explain that, please?
Well, yeah, and the cause of my suffering, I think at that point, was that I was moving away from the suffering. It said the suffering was trying to get away from the suffering. And so actually by turning toward the suffering and getting to know it intimately, which is of course the path of the Dharma, then the suffering began to release itself. And that's why the Buddha teaching became so powerful to me, because I saw it actually happening. That my attempt to escape, fix, or resolve was intensifying my suffering. And that turning inward, looking, knowing, and experiencing was the freedom.
Last question. When you turn into it and don't avoid it and you face it, isn't that perpetuating the clinging because you're still keeping involved in it?
Well, when I say turning into it, it was done with the spacious awareness, so it wasn't the self anymore. It was actually the releasing of the Lisa that wanted to fix it. And in that releasing, then the self was freed, and the awareness was able to hold all of it. So getting rid of that self clinging and that self efforting was really the space.
Thank you kindly.
You're welcome. So let's see there's several questions here. See if I can go down a little bit. Let's see. Yeah. Let's see. Okay. When the same challenges appear, variation of theme, does it mean that we are still in the process of working it out? Unpleasant teachers that keep coming. Thank you. So this is Joanne. Okay, so yeah, I think you're right. It is kind of like it's the same process of working it out. That, and I don't want to say that like I think what happens is when those same challenges appear, we're simply called to keep meeting it with our awareness and with our compassion. We're really called to continue to meet those challenges to the best of our skillfulness. And perhaps we hone that skillfulness in our capacity to respond and to meet, and to look at how we might respond in a way that gives us more space, that gives us a chance to have a response that might be more helpful and supportive to us. And yet I think it's important not to get into sort of that self-blame. It's like for years I kept having the same kind of relationships, like before I got married and I was going out, dating people, I kept running into the same kind of guy over and over and over again. And so I thought, well, maybe, there's sort of that I'm attracting it or whatever. But what happened was that I had to let go of my own demand for a particular type of relationship or a particular type of happiness. And I had to, in a way, being called to look at my experience as it was. And it was a kind of grasping that was causing me to suffering. And I just let go of the grasping. And then, it wasn't so important, whether that person was the right one or not the right one, but there was more spaciousness around it. And then I knew, the radar changed in a sense, in that was something I could let go of a lot more quickly. Now, sometimes we can't do that at work. We don't have choice we don't have external choice. And so we have to keep working with our own internal response. So it can be tricky and it can be complicated at times, but a lot of that is just the discernment in how we're kind of meeting ourselves and meeting the situations in the world. And so we just have to, keep looking at that and keep looking at how we hone our awareness and our response, knowing that we don't want to blame ourselves, but we do want to be compassionate and aware of what these circumstances are.
Lisa, I have a quick follow-up. So the whole karma about cause and effect, there's not energy that you're emanating that somehow draws these people into your orbit?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. I do think, and I don't want to get too literal, because it can definitely turn into sort of an attitude of blaming ourselves. But I do think sometimes there can be a quality of simply unconscious. It's kind of like what Thich Nhat Hanh was talking about when he was talking about the Thai or the shirt. And he said, sometimes you think you're choosing the shirt, but it chooses you. And I think there is a quality, there's deep cultural as well as internal conditioning that does sometimes choose us. And in a sense, then a lot of circumstances in life are conditioned in a way that we may not see how that's playing out. And so those things happen without our even seeing it happening. And yet it's important not to blame ourselves, but to look at the kind of conditioning that is internal and external that may be, supporting or playing into that, so that then we have, we're cultivating more choice, so that then we have a response that would be in alignment with skillfulness or less suffering in our lives. So yes, I think looking at that again, we just have to kind of explore that in a way that helps us to see, and sometimes I think for years, when I was talking about my difficult relationships, I do think in a way, I thought I was choosing those relationships. I think the conditioning underlying was choosing me, and it took me a long time to see that and then to begin to undo that. But again, to always be done with compassion and not with like self-blame or criticism in any way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I've just been struggling with this issue for a long time, so I'm really glad you talked about it. Because for so long, I think, it's like something that you've done previously that's causing you to keep having the same lessons over and over again. So you're saying that as part of the conditionings, apart from me, myself, and I, and something else external.
Yeah, there's more, there's factors that we don't always see. And I think it's really important. And of course, that's what Buddha was talking about too. That these causes and conditions don't have a single point that we can like isolate. And so it's really kind of in a way broadening our awareness to look at all of the factors that are at play. And then I think that does help us to have more, ultimately we begin to have more agency, over our response, because otherwise it gets very tight. I find that if I get too tight and I look too heavily, this is how it has to be, or this is causing it, then I don't have much room for a more skillful response or something that would bring me more peace and joy.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, we have Jonathan.
Liz was before me.
Okay, Jonathan, are you? Yeah, there you go.
Jonathan was sharing that Liz had her hand up first.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Jonathan.
Very
Liz?
polite, Jonathan. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, I'm 85 years old. I started therapy when I was 20. I came to Buddhism 30 years ago. I'm still dealing with all of this,
Yeah.
and it's painful. And I'm in the Year to Live program through Spirit Rock. And honestly, after all this work, I'm all of a sudden having these discoveries that I didn't see after all these years of work. And this is, I know one of the principles of, I've forgotten which principle, but effort. Effort is true. Effort is real. This takes effort. It's not magically going to disappear overnight. And self-compassion, I discovered self-compassion very late, about 4 years ago. But what has changed that made in my life? And this is hard work
It is.
for many of us.
Yes.
And we have to repeat it over, or noticing over and over and over again. And I think noticing conditioning is extremely important. And forgiving ourselves. We're doing the best we can, and in some circumstances, it's very, very hard. To be on our own side and to be the cliche of being our own best friend is true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Okay, Jonathan now?
Hello, I just got my neighbor pop was just saying she's locked out, so I'll be back later. Thank you.
Oh, okay, sure. Okay, let's
Maybe
see.
if you could read through the chat a little bit. There's a lot happening. A couple just back where you left off, there's a few more.
Let's see. Yeah. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, I see some beautiful comments. Looking to see a question here. Okay, let's see. I'll go to this one. This looks like a question to me. The wrap up of the talk was a bit fast for me. I understand that really turning toward the suffering is key. And could you say a few more words about what you said in the wrap up? Something like, we do our best to set and follow positive intentions. Yeah, I just looking at the right intention, which of course is part of the Eightfold Path and one of the core kind of beginning aspects of the path, and yet it's also kind of an underpinning of how our path and how we practice, and so intention is something that we have to keep refreshing. It's not to be taken for granted and saying, well, I have good intentions, or this is my intention for my life and my path, and so this is all I have to do now. It's, to me, it's continuously, it's like a feedback loop that we continuously see coming and going. Like, we create an intention, and we can watch those times when the intention seems to bear fruit, and then we can look at those times when our intention is really blocked, and the places in which, as someone said, that the woman was talking about how after a whole lifetime, there's still those places where that stuckness happens, and I think it's important to realize that even with skillful intention, we can have times where the intention doesn't seem to penetrate certain aspects of our karma or our suffering. And seeing that, that's coming back to kindness and coming back to compassion and awareness. And then we can look at what might we cultivate in a way that can open this path more fully and more deeply. And so we're not holding intention as a concrete fixed thing, but something that we can work with that is fluid, and that we can continue to go back to, as I consider it, a compass for our lives. It's a compass. So we can go back and look at that compass again. Is the compass taking me in the right direction? Do I need to adjust in other words, do I need to look at the compass in a different way? And I think, so much of our path can give us that compass. The whole Eightfold Path brings us that clarity and compass that we can come back to and refresh and continue to cultivate, knowing that we're going to keep messing up, we're going to keep screwing up, and yet we can keep refreshing that. To me, that's the power of the path and the practice. We can keep refreshing. We can keep coming back to our hearts. We can keep coming back to our values. And then from there, we can engage in right effort. We can engage in the entire of the path, knowing that we have something to guide us along the way, but that we're not going to be perfect. And that's the kindness, and that's the coming back and the refreshing. And sometimes when I feel like I really screwed up, or I haven't fully, responded in a way that I think was skillful, or I got knotted up, when I come back to the value of compassion and awareness, I can really see that. And I can really offer space. And when I have space, I can be kinder to me, and I can be kinder to the world. It's when we're knotted that we can't be. But as I was speaking earlier, bringing some kindness even to those hard places, those knotted places, can begin to open us up to our intention and give us more room to live out of those intentions. And I think we all have to determine for ourselves what our truest and deepest intentions are in this life, what matters most. And those come out of our values, those come out of the things we care most deeply about. And hopefully they're wholesome and they're in alignment with our path and our practice. So I hope that helped a little bit. And so let's see, Jonathan.
So sorry, my and the neighbor
Oh,
not just as
okay. It just keeps showing up.
falling on me. So, but this third time lucky, I guess. So this one. I guess it's sort of two things come to mind. I guess the inner critic. I would just spent a week with a couple of friends on a project, and I mean, my God, this person is such a constantly worrying, being anxious, and I know now not to say don't be anxious or try to fix or anything. I just listen. Okay, you're feeling anxious. Okay. Okay. So what do we need to do next? But I just guess what can one do about if a friend is in that kind of sort of anxiety spiral, I guess.
Yeah, where that shows up. Yeah, in the have somebody brought up the rain practice. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I've heard of it. Tara Brach, I got one of her books, unread sadly, books.
Yeah, that's a really useful practice for in the moment awareness. So rain is recognize, so you recognize, let's say you're going off into that spiral. So the first thing, we can never have choice to meet our response until we recognize our response. We're going to stay, so we have to cultivate just even a moment of recognition. Oh, I'm in this spiral. And then the next one, A, is for accept. So we accept that this is arising in this moment. And then I is for investigate. And so we're exploring, and I think investigating experientially, looking at what's happening in the mind and the body. And then N has two different meanings. One is nurture. So this is where we start to be kind and compassionate to that spiral. And the other is not self. And so when we pull the I out of the equation, we have more room to create space and to be kind to ourselves. And so that is a really beautiful practice that if you just kind of remember that acronym and follow those simple steps, it can be a way in the midst of a spiral to begin to orient ourselves back.
Cool. So yeah, and I guess more for me about choice. I know often I'm getting better, but often I feel so addicted to my phone sometimes of reading about terrible news or watching online videos about that. So sometimes I was leaving my phone downstairs to go out to sleep, and that worked. And then my mind was like, no. So I'll sit downstairs scrolling on my phone till early hours of the morning. I'm like, oh my God. So and I guess I mean, you mentioned alcoholism story too, but people have all sorts of habits and addictions and compulsions. I mean, yeah, how does what the teaching tonight, how could I, tonight skillfully, hopefully use that to get to bed at a reasonable hour and be able to be my better self. It's a habit I've battled for many, many years now. Yeah, any thoughts, Mark?
One thing I would suggest, and in the Tibetan tradition, they have a word called shempa, which is the hook. The hook is what drives us to go to our addictions and our habituated responses and our cell phones. There's a moment that something arises in us, say the discomfort, and then the hook is we reach for the phone, or we reach for a snack, and so the practice is cultivating the noticing of the hook and stopping and pausing, even for just a moment before you act. So it's like noticing the hook. Even if you go ahead and get on your phone or whatever it is you do, see and notice the felt sense of the hook, that discomfort in the body, the thing that makes us want to escape. even just for a moment. You know, sometimes we're under the control of trauma or fear to the point where we can't really stop it. And so we need to, again, be compassionate. But even if we can just have a moment of seeing that hook, then we're creating a little bit of space from the conditioning and response, and then it can grow. And sometimes I always tell people, if you can't stop the hook when it happens, go back later and then notice it and work with it later when it's not so charged, because slowly we do create more space. And so that's a way to work with that response. So
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you.
welcome. Okay, so we're just about out of time. And so I just wanted to answer, I think somebody, yeah, there's been a lot of things in the thread, and I'm sorry that I haven't been able to respond to everybody. But I think we're pretty much out of time here. But I really appreciate everybody's interactions and questions, and you're always welcome to reach out to me directly if you would have any burning questions around this. And I'm going to put my email address here, since we weren't able to get to everything. So I'm happy to just respond directly in that way if you'd like. And so it's a topic that is vast, and certainly one session doesn't even touch the surface of it really. But I did want to do that. And I also wanted to just let you know a few things about what I offer. I do offer a Monday night practice at One Dharma Nashville, and we do have a Zoom option so people can come in from anywhere. And so the website, I'm just going to give you the website for that if you're interested. You can go to that and look and also see what my offerings are. I teach retreats regularly, and I have some retreats coming up for some of you guys out in California. I'll be at Big Bear this November, and with Trudy Goodman. Some of you guys, I'm sure, know Trudy Goodman, and other retreats that I'm doing, but I have various offerings. So anyway, feel free to reach out if you, I'm sorry I couldn't answer everybody's questions today. We had so much going on. And so I think that's, we're about done here. And yeah, I appreciate everybody's presence and practice today and your engagement. And so thanks, everyone.
Mhm.